I was halfway down my driveway, helmet in hand, when I heard the unmistakable grind of a tow truck winch tightening behind me. My stomach dropped. The HOA Karen from across the street stood there with her arms crossed, lips curled in victory, pointing at my motorcycle like she'd just caught a criminal in the act. She shouted that I was violating community rules, that bikes weren't allowed, that she'd warned me before. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Phones came out. And right then, with the hook already sliding under my wheels, she smiled and said, "This is what happens when you don't listen." I didn't argue. I didn't panic. I just smiled back, because she had absolutely no idea what kind of motorcycle she'd just called a tow truck for. The bike sat quietly on the curb, black and white paint gleaming under the sun, looking ordinary to anyone who didn't know its story. I'd parked it there early that morning after a night shift, too tired to roll it into the garage. The HOA rules said vehicles had to be inside overnight, but I'd done this before without issue. This time was different. Karen had been watching, waiting. The second the clock hit 8, she was already dialing, narrating my supposed crime to the dispatcher like she was reporting a bank robbery. As the tow driver climbed out, clipboard ready, Karen launched into her speech about property values, safety, and unapproved vehicles. She spoke loudly, clearly enjoying the audience. I noticed the driver pause, eyes drifting to the insignia barely visible on the bike's frame. He frowned, then looked at me. I gave him a nod. Karen kept going, demanding the bike be removed immediately, threatening fines, towing fees, and more complaints if he didn't act fast. That's when the driver asked a simple question. "Ma'am, are you sure you want this bike towed?" Karen scoffed and waved her hand, telling him to do his job. He turned the clipboard around and pointed to a line of text etched near the VIN. Her voice trailed off as she leaned closer. The air shifted, the confidence drained from her face, because stamped right there was something she hadn't expected. Something that changed everything. I remembered the day I bought it. The crowded police auction lot, the officer's warning, and the paperwork that followed. I remembered signing forms, transferring titles, and being told to keep documents handy. Standing there now, watching Karen's certainty crack, I felt calm, almost amused, knowing the rules she worshipped were about to turn against her in a very public, unforgettable way today. The tow truck engine idled. Neighbors leaned in, and Karen finally realized this wasn't just any motorcycle. Karen's eyes darted from the bike to the tow driver, then to me like she was searching for someone to back her up. The driver cleared his throat and crouched near the frame, tracing the numbers with his finger. He asked if I had the paperwork. I nodded and reached into my backpack, pulling out a neatly folded envelope. I always carried for situations exactly like this. Karen scoffed again, louder this time, insisting none of that mattered because HOA rules were HOA rules. She said it didn't matter where the bike came from. It was still a violation, and she wanted it gone. The driver didn't hook anything yet. Instead, he stood up and said something that instantly changed the mood. He explained that before towing a vehicle, especially one flagged in the system, he had to verify ownership and status. Karen snapped that she'd already verified it by seeing it parked illegally. That earned a raised eyebrow. He took the papers from me and began reading carefully, his tone shifting from routine to cautious. As he read, Karen's confidence wavered. She started talking faster, repeating the words private, property and association authority, like a chant. But the driver wasn't listening anymore. He asked me how I'd gotten the bike. I told him the truth. A sealed bid police auction, sold after being retired from service, legally transferred, inspected and registered. I pointed to the line on the document that stated its origin. Karen leaned in again, squinting, as if the words might change if she stared hard enough. That's when the driver straightened up and said calmly that the bike was formerly law enforcement property. Not stolen, not abandoned, not illegal, and more importantly, still flagged in certain databases due to its previous status. Towing it without cause could trigger a report. Karen laughed nervously and said that was ridiculous, that she'd never heard of such a thing. The laughter didn't last. The driver pulled out his phone and made a call, stepping a few feet away. While he was gone, Karen turned on me. She accused me of trying to intimidate her, of playing games, of thinking I was above the rules. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked her if she'd actually read the HOA bylaws about enforcement authority. She said she didn't need to because she knew them. A neighbor nearby quietly muttered that board members weren't allowed to order towels without board approval. Karen shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. The driver returned, face serious now. He said the call confirmed it. This wasn't just an HOA issue anymore. If the bike was towed improperly, responsibility wouldn't fall on me. It would fall on the person who ordered it. Karen's face went pale. For the first time since this started, she stopped talking. The tow truck engine shut off completely, and the crowd grew silent, waiting for what would happen next. Karen stood frozen for a moment like her brain was buffering, then suddenly found her voice again. She insisted there had to be some mistake, that no motorcycle could still cause issues just because it once belonged to the police. She demanded the tow driver call again, this time, someone higher. Her tone shifted from confident to sharp, edged with panic. The driver didn't argue. He simply told her another call was already being made, and this one wasn't to his dispatcher. A patrol car rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac not even 10 minutes later. That's when the reality finally hit. Neighbors who had been watching quietly now stepped fully outside, curiosity turning into excitement. Karen's posture stiffened. She tried to laugh it off, saying she'd called the tow as a favor to the community and didn't expect all this drama. The officer stepped out, calm and professional, and walked straight toward the bike. He didn't look at Karen first. He looked at the VIN, then at me. I greeted him, explained the situation, and handed over the same paperwork I'd shown the tow driver. He flipped through it carefully, nodding as he went. Karen interrupted, launching into a speech about HOA authority and rule enforcement. The officer listened politely, then asked a single question that stopped her cold. "Are you an authorized agent of the city, or this vehicle's owner?" She hesitated. Said she was on the HOA board. Said that should be enough. The officer shook his head and explained, clearly and publicly, that HOA boards do not have police authority, and they especially don't have the right to seize or tow a vehicle without following specific legal steps. He added that vehicles originating from police auctions often remain flagged to prevent wrongful seizure or fraud. That's why the tow driver had been cautious. Karen's face flushed red. She tried to argue that the bike was parked overnight in violation of community rules. The officer acknowledged that might be an HOA issue, but said enforcement meant notices and fines, not immediate towing ordered by a private individual. He then turned to the tow driver and told him he was free to leave. No tow, no fees, no action against the bike. That should have been the end of it, but Karen pushed further. She accused me of exploiting a loophole and wasting police time. That's when the officer's tone changed. He explained that making a false or improper tow request could itself be a violation, especially if it risked unlawful seizure of property. He asked Karen for her name and role on the board. The crowd went silent again. Phones were definitely recording now. Karen gave her information, voice barely steady. The officer wrote it down, then handed her a small card. He told her the HOA might want to review its procedures because complaints had already been logged. As the patrol car pulled away, the tow truck followed soon after, leaving Karen standing there alone, surrounded by neighbors who suddenly had a lot of questions for her. I rolled my bike back into the driveway, untouched. Karen avoided my eyes. But I knew this wasn't over yet. HOA drama never ends that easily, and the fallout from this morning was only just beginning. By the next morning, the neighborhood felt different. Like a storm had passed, but the air was still charged. People waved as I walked outside, some smiling, some whispering. Karen's house was quiet, blinds drawn tight, but that silence didn't last long. Around noon, an official-looking envelope appeared on her door, delivered by another board member who looked uncomfortable the entire time. Word traveled fast. The HOA had called an emergency meeting. I didn't plan on going, but curiosity won. That evening, the clubhouse was packed. Neighbors who never showed up before suddenly cared deeply about bylaws and authority. Karen sat at the front table, rigid, jaw clenched, while the board president cleared his throat and began reading from printed documents. He referenced complaints, improper enforcement, and potential liability. Each word felt heavier than the last. When the tow incident came up, all eyes shifted to Karen. She tried to explain, saying she'd acted in the community's best interest, that she believed the bike was abandoned or illegal. The board president stopped her gently but firmly. He pointed out that no violation notice had been issued, no board vote had occurred, and no legal consultation had been sought. He even mentioned the police officer's report, which had already been forwarded to the HOA's legal counsel. A murmur spread through the room. Someone asked if the HOA could be sued. Another asked who would pay if that happened. The board president didn't answer directly, but his silence said enough. Karen's confidence cracked again. She insisted she was being targeted, that people were overreacting. A neighbor stood up and said this wasn't the first time she'd overstepped. Others nodded. Stories poured out about warning letters, threats, and selective enforcement. Then the president announced the decision. Until further review, Karen was suspended from enforcement duties. Any future actions would require full board approval. The room buzzed. Karen stood up abruptly, chair scraping loudly, and accused everyone of turning against her. She stormed out, leaving the door swinging behind her. After the meeting, people approached me, asking about the bike. I told them the truth again, about the auction, the paperwork, and how close it had come to being towed improperly. Many shook their heads, some apologizing for not speaking up sooner. One neighbor joked that my motorcycle had done more for HOA reform than years of complaints. Later that night, I parked the bike in the same spot, just for a moment. Not to provoke, but to remind myself of how easily power can be misused, and how quickly it can disappear when challenged calmly and correctly. The street was quiet. No tow trucks, no shouting. Just the low tick of the engine cooling, and a sense that something had finally shifted. But deep down, I knew Karen wouldn't let this go quietly. Pride rarely fades overnight, and consequences have a way of echoing when least expected. Karen's face had gone from red to pale, and I could practically see her ego crumbling under the weight of reality. The police officer, calm but firm, asked her to explain why she attempted to have a vehicle towed that was technically city property. She stammered, flustered, trying to justify her actions with HOA rules and neighborhood safety. But the officer didn't even flinch. "You realize," he said, "that towing this bike without legal authority could have resulted in criminal charges, right?" Karen's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she muttered something about fees, violations, and the community rules. Meanwhile, the neighbors were glued to the scene, some filming, some whispering, others laughing openly. It was a perfect storm of public humiliation. I stayed calm, leaning casually against my bike, watching Karen spiral. She had built her identity around enforcing arbitrary rules, intimidating neighbors, and creating chaos, but none of that worked against a legal police auction bike. And now, facing law enforcement and a crowd of onlookers, her entire reputation was unraveling. The officer handed her a gentle but firm warning. "Ma'am, next time, make sure you understand the law before taking action, and I'd recommend keeping your disputes civil and legal." Karen's jaw dropped, her shoulders slumping. She had gone from self-proclaimed HOA queen to a lesson in humility, all in front of the neighborhood. Then, as if the universe wanted to put a bow on the situation, one of the neighbors called out, "Hey Karen, maybe stick to enforcing lawn decorations, not city property." Laughter erupted, and even Karen couldn't muster a response. She turned and stormed back to the HOA office, muttering furiously. But the crowd was already buzzing with stories, clips, and memes about her epic meltdown. I kicked the kickstand down and swung my leg over the motorcycle, the engine roaring to life beneath me. The sound was music, a celebration of victory and sanity. Karen had tried to call a tow truck on me, and instead she had been schooled by the law, the neighbors, and a simple motorcycle. As I rode slowly down the street, neighbors waving, children pointing, and a few giving thumbs up, I realized something. HOA Karens are dangerous, sure, but they also make the most unforgettable stories. Today, one of the most legendary HOA battles had been fought and won. My motorcycle remained untouched, legal, and victorious, while Karen's ego had been officially towed, right out of her control. The lesson was clear. Never underestimate the power of a well-documented vehicle, the law, and a calm demeanor in the face of an HOA meltdown. Some battles are small, some are loud, and some are unforgettable. And today, the neighborhood would talk about this one for years. If you felt the heat of this story, hit like, because real victories start when we stand together. Subscribe to Karen's Story Hub to follow every jaw-dropping moment from my Karen files. And tell me below, how would you handle a Karen trying to control your life?